Good afternoon. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the music of the Romantic period, and we're going to focus on the art song. Now, before we talk about art songs, or lied, as they're called, you might want to remember the context. Okay, now during the 19th century, we start to see the novel become a very, very important thing in Europe and in America. And people, in the middle class, we start to see the Industrial Revolution. People have more money now. People have, a little bit more free time as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And what do? Well, they turn to literature, and they're reading novels, like Wuthering Heights, Dracula by Shelley, and all these sorts of novels are appearing. Okay. And so we do have this increased attention to literature in the Romantic era. Okay. With that, one of the offshoots is a new genre called the art song. Okay. We also have other new genres in the Romantic period that are going to come out called the program symphony. Okay, it's going to be a symphony with a narrative to it, or the tone poem. Okay. Now, the difference between a program symphony and a tone poem are they're both going to be pieces that have like a narrative to them for orchestra. Tone poems are just going to become one movement entity, or one kind of one and done piece, where a program symphony is going to be an actual multi-movement symphony with an extra narrative to it. In addition, we have technological innovations to instruments. We have a new piano. Okay. We have a bigger piano, 88 keys. It's got a cast iron sounding board, and so it's really it's an instrument that can really be self-sufficient. In addition, the piano is going to be they're mass-producing pianos by this time, and they'll be able to be purchased by the middle and upper classes to have in their homes. So you're going to see the piano in parlors in people's houses. So after dinner or in some free time, people would venture into the parlor and play some music. Maybe you play a couple small miniatures on the keyboard. Maybe you'd play and sing some of these art songs. Okay, because these art songs, again, they're going to be short 2-minute pieces. Another thing that's going to go lend to this is political events. And there's a lot of political events that had influence on the Romantic period. And we have a lot of political events are as a result of are influencing the nationalistic music styles, both of instrumental music and opera. Okay, now nationalism, that's a word that I want to clarify for. And nationalism is a love for one's country. Okay. And it's a little bit different than patriotism, because patriotism, same thing, is a love for one's country. But with nationalism, you're taking it to a step further, saying, maybe my country's better than yours. Okay. And during this time in the 19th century, we have the countries of Europe, Germany, France, England, the Scandinavian countries, Russia, and they have a lot of these nationalistic tendencies going on, saying, hey, my country's better than your country. Okay, and these are kind of the seedlings that will eventually lead down into World War I. So we do have, the unification of Germany and Italy. These are things that are going on during this time. In 1848, we do see a series of revolutions, and again, this is one of those things that's going on during the Romantic period. Now, in the Romantic period, we're going to see a lot more composers that we're going to talk about. Okay, in the classical period, we had 3. Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn. Okay, there were many, many more composers during that era, but the 3 kind of big guys that were really influential were, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. When we get to the Romantic period, we have a lot more influential composers. Okay, so in the decade of 1803 to 1813, we saw the birth of a myriad of brilliant and star of romantic composers. So, and I'll go through them. So, if you guys can look at the cursor, on the top left, that's Franz Schubert. We have Chopin below him. Then we have Richard Wagner. In the middle, this is Hector Berlioz, and we'll talk about his Symphonie Fantastique. We have Franz Liszt at the bottom. And then on the right, we have Clara Schumann, Robert Schumann, and then Giuseppe Verdi. So all these guys are going to be very, very influential in the Romantic period. And this is not comprehensive either. There's plenty of others that aren't in here, but these are definitely the ones that we're going to talk about in the early Romantic era. The art song. So during the 19th century, we see this new genre of art songs come to fruition. And it's a very, very important genre that comes out. And keep in mind, we have a lot of great poetic activity during the 19th century. A lot of great poets about. We have Wordsworth, we have Keats, Shelley, Goethe, Heine, and Eichendorff are three big German poets. And poets, they viewed music as the purest of the arts. Okay. Now, there's a strong bond between music and poetry, especially with these art songs. What happens is composers will go to Goethe's poetry. He'll take a poem by Goethe, and he'll use that text as lyrics to a song. Okay, so he'll write out the melody, and he'll have a piano accompaniment. Now, what happens here is the piano accompaniment is going to intensify or add the emotion of what's going on in the text or the poem. Maybe it's going to, try and portray actions of things that happen in the poem. Maybe it's going to try to enhance the emotion. So what we're doing with these art songs is we're marrying poetry and music together, and we're elevating the art. Okay. So people love this. It was extremely popular during the Romantic period. So a couple terms that we'll talk about. Art song is basically it's any solo song with voice and piano accompaniment with high artistic aspirations. And we do have the term lied, which you want to know. Sometimes it's German lied. Most of these art songs were cultivated by German composers, either in Austria or Germany, so we use their terminology. So it's either German lied, or if it's a group of songs, it's called Lieder. Okay, that's just the plural version of it. Now, what happens is composers will not just make one song, because one song, you write a song that's 2 minutes long. Okay. What they'll do is they'll take a series of poems that are based off of a similar theme, and they'll write 12, they're like maybe 10 to 12 different songs, and they'll create what's a song cycle. Okay, and it's a collection of songs that's unified by a common theme or literary idea. Most common themes of the time in the Romantic period, the number one is love. Maybe it's unrequited love, maybe it's falling in love. Also, being in nature is another big Romantic theme that song cycles can be based off as well. Franz Schubert. Okay, Franz Schubert is a great composer. He lived at 1797 to 1828. Some people consider him, a classical composer. Some people consider him an early Romantic composer. He kind of lives right on the cusps. He's doing a lot. You could say he's a classical composer that's doing a lot of Romantic things, because he does use a lot of classical forms. But again, he writes about 600 of these German lied, which is a Romantic tradition. So, for this text, we talk about him in a kind of a Romantic kind of view. So he lived in Vienna. Okay, he's a Viennese composer. Okay, and it also says he lived in the shadow of Beethoven. During his lifetime, he was not nearly as popular as, of course, Beethoven was during the time, and many of his works don't really become famous during his lifetime, but are famous well after he had passed on. He's an awesome composer and writes some really, really wonderful stuff. So he composes more than 600 of these Lieder, okay, 600 songs during his life. That's a lot, okay? And please keep in mind, these guys are handwriting these songs out. There's no computers, there's no technology back then. There's no music notation software, no copiers. This is all by hand. So you gotta keep that in mind, which puts 600 songs in a context. It's a lot. Now he lived a bohemian lifestyle. He lived on more of a he was poor most of his life. Again, when you're a musician, you don't really have a lot of money coming in because being an artist is one of those things where you usually don't make a lot of money. But what he would do, he'd either live with friends or he would have these things called Schubert tides. So he'd have his friends come over, and they'd have like these Schubert tides or musical parties that he would go to his friend's house and he'd play a couple of his piano sonatas. Maybe he would play a string quartet at some of these parties, or he would play these songs. Okay, or he had these songs performed at these Schubert tides. Okay, yeah, that's how he kind of got his music known. Now, in addition to writing 600 songs, he wrote piano sonatas. He wrote some awesome piano sonatas, 8 or 9 symphonies, and operas. He wrote string quartets. So he did write in a multitude of different genres. So one of the famous songs of Schubert is called the Earl King. Okay, it's written in 1815. He was about 17 years old, and he wrote the song in a matter of hours. Okay. Now the text is based off of a poem called "The Earl King" by Goethe. Okay, and it's a dramatic ballad. It's in this room. It's the story is about this father and his son who's sick, and he's riding on a horse through the night with his son, to get to the doctor. Okay, or get to town. Okay. And as they're riding, they're tormented by this evil king of elves, who's wants to take the soul of the young boy. Okay, and what the poem is kind of about like the supernatural. Okay, and Romantics loved like the supernatural, things beyond the grave, the macabre. They had this fascination with this, and this is one of those poems where this father and this son who's on his deathbed is getting taunted by these evil spirits. Okay, and that's kind of the essence of the poem. Now, when we look at the music of the Earl King, first off, the piece is through composed. That just means the music's going to be constantly changing from the beginning to the end. There's no major section that repeats. And what Schubert does with this piece is he portrays each of the characters in the poem basically through using the singer's range. The father's going to be singing in a low range to calm his son. The Earl King is going to be kind of in a major key, and it has like this more of a seductive kind of style. Whereas the child is going to be in his upper range of the voice, and we'll hear this throughout the song. So we have the narrator starts off. He begins and ends the poem, and he's the observer. He's just giving us the information of what's going on. Let's listen to the narrator.
Wir reiten zu spät durch Nacht und Wind. Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind.
Now, we're going to listen to the father, okay? And the father's going to be singing in this low range. Basically he's going to be saying, he sings about, hey, telling his son, calm down. You're just hallucinating. There's no elf king there. You're seeing mists of the fog and stuff like that. But it's going to be in the low range of the voice. Let's listen.
Mein Sohn, es ist ein Nebelstreif.
Now we have the Elf King, and when the Elf King sings, it's going to be more seductive. It's going to be the mood changes. It's going to be in this major key, and the actual mood of the accompaniment changes as well. So let's go listen to the Elf King.
es Kind, komm mit mir, gar schöne Spiele spiel ich mit dir. Ein bunte Blumen zieht an dem Strand, meine Mutter hat mal Schulden gefahren.
Again, so we changed. It's in a quiet setting, and we went from a minor key to a major key, kind of having this seductive lure. Finally, we have the young boy, and he's going to be in an upper range of the tenor's voice. Let's go. The first cry sounds like this.
Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht?
And of course, in the second and third cry, it's going to get more intense. The second cry sounds like this.
Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort?
And then finally, the third one sounds like this.
Mein Vater, jetzt hast du mich an.
Again, it's getting higher and higher and higher as the terror kind of accumulates. Now, the piano accompaniment. Okay, it's probably one of the most famous piano accompaniments for any German leader, because first off, it's the piano. It's setting the tone for the piece. It has these triplet octaves, and they go throughout the entire song. The song's maybe like 3 or 4 minutes long, and it's nonstop. These octaves going back and forth. And this piano accompaniment, what it's trying to do, it's giving this like sense of intensity, but it's giving this, it's the sense of a galloping horse riding throughout, through the woods and so forth. Okay, and it helps to reinforce, the song's narrative and drama. So let's go listen to the piano accompaniment. The Schumanns. Now, we looked at Schumann in a different lecture. He was a phenomenal composer, wrote plenty of German Lied, wrote a lot of miniature piano compositions as well. And he also wrote large-scale work, piano concerto, many symphonies, and so forth. Now, he also married his piano teacher's daughter, Clara Wieck. Clara Wieck actually becomes Clara Schumann. Robert Schumann also, he has hand damaged and was unable to play, so there he focuses on composition. And Robert Schumann is also, afflicted with mental illness as well. But keep in mind, both of these two, Robert Schumann and his wife Claire, both of them were very, very important and influential composers and musicians in the Romantic period. Clara Schumann, she becomes probably the most prominent pianist of the 19th century. And she's a female pianist performing at a time where it was frowned upon for females to have a career, being a career performer. Okay. But she championed many new romantic piano works of the time. She performed her husband's piano concerto. She premiered Brahms's piano works and his piano concertos and so forth. So she definitely was. She was probably one of the most important pianists of the 19th century. So continuing talking about Clara Schumann, because we're going to look at a song by Clara Schumann. She was one of the greatest piano virtuosos of the 19th century, and she lived a fairly long time. She lived 1819 to 1896. I think she died a year before Brahms passed away, or right a year after. But she toured Europe as a prodigy, phenomenal pianist, and she was also a composer. And she wrote some great pieces as well. And she was already an international star when she married Robert Schumann in 1840, but she toured as a performer well into the age of 70. So yeah, definitely she was definitely a prominent figure in the Romantic period. Now we're going to look at a song by Clara Schumann. The song is called Liebst du Schönheit, and it translates to "If you love for beauty." Um, it's a wonderful poem. The poem is by Joseph Eichendorff, and it was a popular poem at the time in the Romantic period because it was also set by several other composers. And it was written by Clara shortly after she got married to Robert Schumann in 1841. It's a very, very warm and it's an inviting poem. Okay, it's about love, and the form of it basically is going to have one melody that's repeated over and over again. It's called strophic form. Okay, the only difference is the text to that melody is going to change, but the melody is going to stay the same. So let's go listen to a little bit of this.
Liebst du Schönheit, o nicht mich liebe, liebe die Sonne, sie trägt ein goldnes Haar.
So this concludes our lecture on the art song, and it's the end of chapter 17. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking about Romantic piano music in the next chapter.